When I arrived at my daughter's house to surprise her for her 24th birthday, I found her crying alone in the backyard, while her husband's family celebrated inside the house, without her. What I discovered next made me declare war on one of Arizona's most powerful families. But before I tell you what happened, subscribe to the channel. We bring you incredible stories every day. Having you here, subscribed, makes us very happy. Already subscribed. Okay, let's get to the story. My name is Rebecca Hayes, and I'm 42 years old, living in suburban Phoenix with what everyone called the perfect family story. For 2 years, I watched my daughter Ashley bloom in what I thought was a fairy tale marriage to Dr. Marcus Morrison, a charming surgeon from one of Arizona's wealthiest families. The Morrisons owned half the medical practices in Scottsdale, and their charity galas were legendary among the country club set. I remember feeling so proud when Ashley called me that spring, her voice bright with excitement about hosting her first birthday party as Mrs. Morrison. "Mom, Marcus and his family are planning something really special for my 24th, she'd said, and I could practically hear her smile through the phone. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to believe that wealth and social status automatically meant kindness and decency. The red flags had been there all along: subtle comments from Marcus about Ashley's independence, the way Patricia Morrison's compliments always came with backhanded suggestions for improvement. After all, Ashley seemed happy, and isn't that what every mother wants for her child? I should have trusted my instincts when Ashley started declining our weekly coffee dates, claiming she was too busy establishing herself in Scottsdale society. My vibrant, social daughter, who used to call me twice a day, suddenly became elusive, always rushing off the phone with excuses about Marcus needing support or his parents stopping by unexpectedly. When I'd suggest visiting, there was always a reason why it wasn't convenient: charity obligations, Marcus's work schedule, family commitments that somehow never included me. The woman who raised Ashley to be strong and independent watched helplessly as her daughter seemed to shrink into herself, making excuses for missed Sunday dinners and canceled lunch plans. I told myself it was normal for newlyweds to establish their own traditions, that I was being an overprotective mother who needed to let go. My friends at book club assured me this was just part of marriage, that Ashley would find her balance between her old life and her new one. But deep in my gut, something felt wrong, like watching storm clouds gather and knowing you should seek shelter. April 15th, Ashley's 24th birthday, started like any other day at Phoenix General Hospital, with back-to-back surgeries and the controlled chaos of saving lives. I'd called Ashley 3 times that week trying to plan something special, but she'd been evasive about her schedule, mentioning Marcus's surprise party and suggesting we celebrate another time. Something about her tone bothered me, a flatness that reminded me of patients who'd given up fighting. After my shift ended at 7 dar, I drove to the fancy bakery in Scottsdale and bought her favorite lemon cake, the same flavor I'd made for every birthday since she was 3. The drive to Paradise Valley felt like crossing into enemy territory, past gated communities that represented a world I'd never been part of. When I pulled into their circular driveway, I could see lights blazing throughout the house and hear laughter drifting from the backyard. I grabbed the cake and walked toward the celebration with nervous excitement about surprising my daughter. What I found instead would haunt me forever and change everything I thought I knew about the family my daughter had married into. The backyard was filled with elegantly dressed guests sipping champagne and enjoying catered appetizers, but Ashley was nowhere to be seen among the celebration. I searched the crowd of Morrison family friends and Marcus's medical colleagues, expecting to find the birthday girl at the center of attention. Instead, I discovered Ashley sitting alone on the stone steps by the pool house, still in her morning clothes, shivering in the cool April evening without so much as a sweater. Her face was streaked with tears, and she was staring at her own birthday party like an outsider looking through glass. It was Ashley's celebration, but Ashley wasn't invited. She'd been excluded from her own birthday party like some kind of unwelcome stranger. The sight of my daughter sitting there, forgotten and alone while others celebrated in her honor, ignited something primal and fierce in my chest. I dropped the cake and ran to her, wrapping her in my arms as she broke down completely. Through her tears, she whispered the words that confirmed my worst fears. "Mom, I think I made a terrible mistake." In that moment, holding my broken daughter while her husband's family celebrated without her, I realized the war for Ashley's soul had been going on for months, and I was losing. The story Ashley told me that night, sitting in my car because she was afraid to talk in her own home, shattered every assumption I'd made about her marriage. For 8 months, Marcus and his family had been systematically isolating her from everyone who'd known her before she became Mrs. Morrison. It started with suggestions that her old friends weren't sophisticated enough, that her job was embarrassing for a doctor's wife, that her relationship with me was too dependent for a married woman. Patricia Morrison had taken control of Ashley's social calendar, filling it with charity events where Ashley was expected to smile and look beautiful but never express opinions. When Ashley tried to maintain old friendships or suggest activities she enjoyed, she was reminded that her choices reflected on Marcus's reputation. The financial control was perhaps the most insidious aspect. Despite marrying into wealth, Ashley had no access to accounts, no independence, no ability to make decisions without permission. The woman who'd graduated summa cum laude had been reduced to asking her husband for grocery money. The birthday party wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest escalation in a campaign designed to break Ashley's spirit and remake her into Patricia Morrison's vision of the perfect society wife. As we sat in that McDonald's parking lot, surrounded by the smell of fast food and the sound of late-night traffic, Ashley continued revealing the sophisticated psychological warfare the Morrison family had been waging against her since the honeymoon. Every aspect of her life had been systematically criticized and corrected until she no longer trusted her own judgment about anything. Patricia Morrison positioned herself as Ashley's mentor, offering constant advice that was really criticism disguised as helpfulness. Marcus played his role perfectly, publicly praising Ashley while privately undermining her confidence at every opportunity. The combination of public devotion and private criticism kept Ashley constantly off balance, never sure if she was succeeding or failing as a wife. The worst part was how isolated she'd become from any outside perspective that might help her recognize the abuse. When Ashley questioned the financial arrangements or suggested wanting some independence, Marcus became cold and distant, explaining that her desires showed she wasn't fully committed to their marriage. The message was clear: total dependence or total conflict, with no middle ground for compromise or negotiation. That night, as Ashley poured out months of accumulated pain and confusion, I realized my daughter was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people who were systematically destroying every trace of the confident woman she'd been. The birthday party wasn't cruelty, it was strategy, designed to break her spirit completely. As I held my sobbing daughter in the front seat of my Honda Civic, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. The Morrison family thought they were untouchable, protected by wealth and the assumption that people like me would never dare challenge people like them. They thought they could destroy my daughter's spirit with impunity, that their money made them immune to consequences. They were about to learn they had picked the wrong mother to mess with, and that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The war for Ashley's soul was far from over, and I was just getting started. The Monday after Ashley's birthday, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and began what I now think of as my reconnaissance mission into the Morrison Empire. If I was going to save my daughter, I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with and what weapons they had. Dr. Marcus Morrison wasn't just any surgeon. He was head of cardiovascular surgery at Scottsdale Memorial, heir to a medical dynasty that included his grandfather, the legendary heart surgeon who'd founded the state's first cardiac program. Patricia Morrison wasn't just a socialite. She was junior league president, sat on charity boards, and had the social influence to make or break careers in Scottsdale's upper-class community. Judge William Morrison had shaped family law in Arizona for 2 decades, appointed by 3 governors, with decisions that protected wealth and privilege above all else. These weren't just rich people. They were Arizona royalty, with names on hospital wings and university buildings, people who considered themselves untouchable. I was a single mother who worked night shifts, about to go to war with the most powerful family in Scottsdale, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had hurt my daughter. My first stop was Ashley's college roommate, Jessica, who'd been gradually frozen out of Ashley's life despite their previously close friendship. Jessica met me at a coffee shop near ASU, and what she told me confirmed my worst fears about the systematic nature of the Morrison control. "Mrs. Hayes, I've been so worried about Ashley. Every time I try to see her, there's always some excuse about family obligations she can't miss. The few times we have gotten together, she seems like a different person, nervous, apologetic, constantly checking her phone." Jessica showed me screenshots of text conversations, messages revealing canceled plans, and apologetic explanations always centered around Marcus's needs or Patricia's expectations. The last time we had lunch, Ashley barely ate and kept apologizing for everything: the restaurant choice, the time, even the weather. It was like she was afraid of making decisions without permission. What broke my heart was Jessica's description of how Ashley used to be: confident, opinionated, full of plans for travel and career goals. She wanted to see the world, Mrs. Hayes. Now, when I ask about her interest, she just talks about charity events and what Marcus thinks about everything. The conversation with Jessica gave me ammunition to start documenting the changes in Ashley's behavior and building a case for what the Morrison family was doing. I reached out to other friends, former colleagues, and professors who had known Ashley before marriage, and the picture was consistently heartbreaking. Professor Martinez, who had been Ashley's favorite business teacher, told me Ashley had been planning to pursue an MBA before marriage, but dropped the applications without explanation. She was one of my brightest students, Mrs. Hayes. She had analytical skills and leadership potential that could have taken her anywhere in business. When she said she was getting married and wouldn't pursue graduate school, I was surprised. Looking back, I wonder if someone convinced her those plans weren't appropriate. Her former supervisor painted a similar picture of a bright, ambitious woman who suddenly lost interest in career prospects. Ashley was being considered for promotion when she gave notice. She said she needed to focus on supporting her husband's career, but it seemed like such a waste of talent. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became that the Morrison family had systematically dismantled every aspect of Ashley's identity outside her role as Marcus's wife. Armed with this information, I began researching the Morrison family's vulnerabilities, looking for pressure points that might give me leverage. What I discovered was that their perfect facade was built on carefully concealed secrets they couldn't afford to have exposed. Judge Morrison's appointment had come after generous donations to political campaigns, and his decisions consistently favored families with connections to his social circle. Dr. Marcus Morrison's rapid rise to department head had coincided with malpractice suits being quietly settled out of court, suggesting his surgical skills weren't as impressive as his family connections. Patricia Morrison's charitable work was funded by tax-sheltered trusts designed more to protect Morrison wealth than genuinely help causes. Most interesting was the Morrison family's history with inconvenient daughters-in-law. Marcus's older brother had been married twice, and both wives had left Arizona after divorces, accepting modest settlements in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. The pattern was clear. The Morrison family had a system for dealing with wives who didn't fit their vision, using legal and financial pressure to make problems disappear. Understanding this gave me both motivation and strategy. Expose their methods publicly to save Ashley and protect other women. The turning point came when I discovered Ashley's prenuptial agreement, signed without independent legal counsel, was potentially invalid under Arizona law due to lack of financial disclosure and adequate representation. I met with Sarah Chen, a family law attorney specializing in financial abuse and coercive control. and laid out everything I'd learned. Mrs. Hayes, what you're describing sounds like textbook financial and emotional abuse, but proving it legally will be challenging given the Morrison family's influence. Judge Morrison has relationships with most family court judges in the county, and challenging a prenuptial signed by his son requires very careful strategy. Sarah explained the key would be documenting the pattern of control and manipulation, building a case showing the agreement was signed under duress. If we can prove coercive control, we can potentially invalidate not just the prenuptial, but challenge any financial arrangements made without Ashley's genuine consent. The bad news is this family has resources to drag out legal challenges for years, and they won't hesitate to use every tool to protect their reputation. Sarah's assessment was sobering but not discouraging. She'd handled cases against powerful families before and understood that justice sometimes required taking on seemingly untouchable opponents. The catalyst for action came when Ashley called me crying at 2 a.m, whispering that Marcus had threatened to ban me from their home if I continued interfering in their marriage. "Mom, he knows we talked after my birthday, and he's furious. He said you're a bad influence and I need to choose between having a relationship with you and being part of the Morrison family. Patricia thinks some distance might help me mature into the wife Marcus deserves." The ultimatum was exactly what I'd expected. The final move to isolate Ashley from anyone who might help her recognize the abuse. "Ashley, honey, you don't have to choose between loving your mother and being married. Any family that demands that choice isn't worth being part of." I could hear fear in her voice as she whispered back, "But what if they're right? What if I am too dependent? What if I'm not strong enough to be the wife Marcus needs?" The self-doubt broke my heart, but crystallized my resolve. "Baby girl, you are the strongest person I know, and you don't need to become someone else to deserve love. Any man who tries to separate you from your mother doesn't love you. He wants to own you." That whispered conversation became the moment I stopped planning and started acting. The next morning, I drove to Ashley's house while Marcus was at the hospital and Patricia was at tennis, timing my arrival during the narrow window when Ashley might be alone. When Ashley opened the door, I was shocked. My formerly vibrant daughter had lost weight. Her eyes were hollow and exhausted, and she moved like someone afraid of making noise. The house felt like a mausoleum, with perfect furniture showing no trace of Ashley's personality. "Mom, you can't be here," Ashley whispered, glancing at security cameras positioned throughout the house. "Marcus will see you were here, and he's already angry about us talking. Please, I can't handle another confrontation." But I was done tiptoeing around Morrison family rules, done pretending their abuse was acceptable because it came wrapped in wealth. "Ashley, I need you to listen carefully. This isn't normal, and this isn't love. Normal husbands don't separate wives from their mothers, and normal families don't exclude people from their own birthday parties." I took her hands, shocked by how thin and cold they felt. "Baby, I'm going to get you out of this, but I need you to trust me and be ready when I give the signal." Ashley's response broke my heart. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should just try harder to be the wife Marcus wants. Looking at my broken daughter in her perfect prison, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to stop playing by their rules and start playing by mine. That afternoon, I composed an email that would serve as my declaration of war against the Morrison Empire. I sent it simultaneously to Marcus, Patricia, Judge Morrison, and every member of their social circle whose addresses I could find, ensuring their private business would become very public. The subject line was simple: concerning the treatment of Ashley Morrison. The message was even simpler: I know what you're doing to my daughter, and it stops now. If Ashley is harmed, isolated, or manipulated further, I will make sure everyone in Scottsdale knows what kind of family the Morrisons really are. Some secrets are too big to stay buried, and some mothers are too determined to be intimidated. Consider this your only warning. I didn't threaten anything illegal. I simply made clear their behavior was being watched and documented, and their reputation wouldn't protect them from consequences indefinitely. The response was swift. Within 2 hours, Judge Morrison called, his voice cold with rage as he explained I was clearly unstable, and further contact would result in legal action. Mrs. Hayes, you are struggling with your daughter's transition to married life, but your inappropriate behavior damages everyone involved. I suggest you seek professional help for your inability to respect boundaries. His threat didn't intimidate me. It energized me, confirming I'd hit a nerve and they were more vulnerable than they wanted anyone to know. The Morrison family's retaliation came faster and more viciously than anticipated, confirming I had struck at the heart of their carefully constructed facade. Within 24 hours, I received a cease and desist letter from Scottsdale's most expensive law firm, threatening legal action for harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with family relationships. The letter painted me as an unstable, obsessive mother who couldn't accept her daughter's marriage and was engaging in harassment against a respected family. More disturbingly, the letter included details about my work schedule, financial situation, and history of poor decision-making, including my divorce and single motherhood, that could only have come from a private investigation. Judge Morrison had decided the best defense was offense, using every tool to discredit me before I could expose what his family was doing to Ashley. The message was clear. Back down, or they would systematically destroy my reputation and livelihood, just as they'd destroyed Ashley's independence. What they didn't understand was that threatening me only confirmed I was on the right track, and a mother protecting her daughter is the most dangerous opponent they could have chosen. Their intimidation attempts only strengthened my resolve to expose the truth about what they really were behind their perfect image. The psychological pressure against Ashley intensified immediately after my email, as the Morrison family moved to completely cut off her outside contact while ramping up criticism of her behavior and character. Marcus suddenly decided Ashley needed professional help for her unhealthy attachment to me, arranging sessions with Dr. Ellen Whitman, who happened to be Patricia's tennis partner and longtime family friend. Dr. Whitman's therapy seemed designed to reinforce the Morrison narrative rather than help Ashley process her actual experiences. According to Ashley, who managed to call from a gas station bathroom during supervised errands, Dr. Whitman spent sessions explaining how common it was for young wives to struggle with appropriate boundaries with mothers and how important prioritizing marriage over childhood relationships was. She keeps telling me my anxiety and sadness are signs I'm resisting natural growth that comes with marriage. Mom. She says healthy wives find primary emotional support from husbands, not birth families. The therapeutic manipulation was insidious because it gave the Morrison abuse professional legitimacy, making Ashley doubt her perceptions while positioning their control as mental health treatment. When Ashley tried explaining feelings of isolation and sadness, Dr. Whitman reframed these as evidence Ashley needed to work harder at accepting her role rather than symptoms of systematic abuse. My legal battle revealed how deep Morrison influence ran throughout Scottsdale's professional community. When I tried hiring local attorneys to represent Ashley in potential divorce proceedings or challenge the prenuptial agreement, I discovered most family law specialists had either represented the Morrison family or had professional relationships creating conflicts of interest. The few attorneys willing to meet privately acknowledged that taking on Judge Morrison would be career suicide in Scottsdale's legal community, where his influence extended far beyond his courtroom. Mrs. Hayes, I sympathize. But you must understand, Judge Morrison has been shaping family law in this state for 20 years. He's mentored half the family court judges currently on the bench, and his recommendations carry enormous weight. Any attorney taking on his family is committing professional suicide in this market. The message was always the same. The Morrison family was too powerful, too connected, too influential to challenge through conventional legal channels. What these attorneys didn't understand was their willingness to admit defeat before battle confirmed my belief that Morrison power depended on intimidating people into silence. If no one would challenge them through official channels, I would find unofficial ways to expose the truth about their treatment of Ashley and other women who'd fallen into their trap. The breakthrough came when I connected with Elena Rodriguez, a private investigator specializing in domestic abuse and coercive control cases. Elena had worked with Sarah Chen on several cases involving wealthy abusers who used resources to avoid accountability. Mrs. Hayes, families like the Morrisons count on victims being isolated and critics being intimidated into silence. The key to defeating them is documenting everything and finding ways to make their private behavior public in ways they can't control or suppress. Elena's investigation revealed a pattern extending beyond Ashley, including 2 previous daughters-in-law who'd been systematically isolated and financially controlled before being pressured into unfavorable divorce settlements in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Patricia Morrison is particularly skilled at psychological manipulation. She identifies young women eager to please and lacking strong family support, then uses criticism and conditional approval to break down self-esteem and make them completely dependent on family approval. Elena had spoken with both former Morrison wives, living in other states under court orders preventing them from discussing marriages publicly. Both described the same pattern: gradual isolation from friends and family, financial control disguised as protection, constant criticism disguised as guidance, and ultimately threats of legal and social consequences for non-compliance. Most disturbing was that Judge Morrison had used family court influence to ensure custody arrangements favored his sons, making it nearly impossible for divorced wives to maintain meaningful relationships with their children. Armed with Elena's documentation of the Morrison pattern, I began reaching out to journalists and advocacy organizations willing to expose their behavior publicly. The challenge was finding outlets that wouldn't be intimidated by Morrison legal threats or influenced by their social connections in the media community. Most local journalists were hesitant to investigate a family with such significant advertising influence, and many seemed more interested in sensational aspects than serious issues of domestic abuse and judicial corruption. The breakthrough came when I connected with Maria Santos, an investigative journalist for a Phoenix publication specializing in exposing corruption among Arizona's elite families. Mrs. Hayes. This story fits into a larger pattern we've been investigating about how wealthy families use the legal system to enable domestic abuse and avoid accountability. The Morrison case could be key to exposing how judicial corruption and social influence combine to trap women in abusive situations. Maria's investigation would take time to develop properly, but she was committed to exposing truth regardless of Morrison attempts to suppress the story through legal threats or political pressure. The most important thing now is getting Ashley to safety, where she can speak freely about her experiences without fear of retaliation. Once she's in a secure location, we can work together to build a case that will not only free her, but potentially protect other women from suffering the same fate. The plan to extract Ashley from Morrison control required careful timing and coordination, as any obvious rescue attempt would be met with immediate legal retaliation designed to paint me as an unstable kidnapper, rather than concerned mother. Elena had identified patterns in Ashley's supervised schedule that would give us a narrow window when she might leave the house without immediate detection. The key is making it look like Ashley made the decision independently, without coercion from you or anyone else. If they can claim she was kidnapped or coerced, they'll use that to discredit everything she says and potentially have her committed for psychiatric evaluation. The plan was for Ashley to leave during her weekly grocery shopping, the only time she was allowed out alone, though her movements were tracked through phone and credit cards. We arranged for Ashley to abandon her car at the store and switch to an untraceable vehicle, then drive to a safe house Elena had established outside Scottsdale, where Ashley could recover and decide how to proceed. The most important thing is giving Ashley time and space to remember who she was before the Morrison family started reshaping her identity. Right now, she's so programmed to doubt her perceptions that she needs professional help to distinguish between genuine feelings and conditioned responses. The escape would only be the beginning of Ashley's recovery, but it was necessary for breaking the psychological chains that had kept her trapped for almost 2 years. The night before our planned extraction, I received a call that changed everything and confirmed how far the Morrison family would go to maintain control. Marcus called me directly, his voice calm and controlled as he delivered what amounted to a declaration of war. "Mrs. Hayes, I know you've been planning something, and I want you to understand the consequences before you do something we'll all regret. Ashley is emotionally unstable, and any attempt to remove her from her support system could result in serious harm to herself or others. If she disappears or anything disrupts our family, I'll have no choice but to petition for emergency psychiatric evaluation based on her recent erratic behavior and your obvious influence over her mental state." The threat was clear. If I helped Ashley escape, they would have her declared mentally incompetent and committed to a facility where they could control her treatment and prevent her from speaking about her experiences. Furthermore, any allegations she might make about our family while in her current mental state would obviously be products of delusion and outside manipulation, which means they would have no credibility in legal proceedings. I'm sure you understand how devastating it would be for Ashley to have documented mental illness history, especially if she ever wanted children or professional reputation. Marcus's threat revealed their full strategy. They weren't just controlling Ashley's behavior. They were prepared to destroy her legal credibility and social standing permanently if she tried to escape or expose their abuse. That call confirmed everything I'd suspected about the Morrison willingness to weaponize legal and medical systems to maintain control, but it also revealed a fatal flaw in their strategy. Marcus had been so confident in his family's power that he'd essentially confessed to their plan to have Ashley declared mentally incompetent if she tried to leave, giving me evidence to expose their abuse publicly before they could implement their psychiatric strategy. I immediately called Maria Santos and Elena Rodriguez, sharing the recording I'd made of Marcus's threats and explaining how it fit the larger abuse pattern we'd been documenting. "This is perfect," Maria said, excitement evident even over the phone. "He's essentially admitted they're prepared to abuse the psychiatric system to silence Ashley if she tries to speak out. This recording, combined with Elena's pattern evidence, gives us everything we need to expose their methods publicly before they can use those methods against Ashley." The plan shifted from quiet extraction to coordinated public exposure that would protect Ashley by making her story too public for the Morrison family to suppress through usual intimidation tactics. We're going to turn their biggest weapon, their reputation and social standing, into their greatest vulnerability by showing the world what kind of people they really are behind their perfect facade. The war for Ashley's freedom was about to become very public, and the Morrison family was about to learn that some battles can't be won through money, influence, or legal manipulation when truth is powerful enough to overcome all their advantages. The morning of Ashley's liberation dawned clear and cold, the kind of Arizona winter day that makes you believe anything is possible if you're brave enough to reach for it. Maria Santos had worked through the night preparing her exposé for immediate publication, timing the release to coincide with Ashley's planned departure, so the story would be public before they could implement their psychiatric retaliation strategy. Elena Rodriguez had positioned herself at strategic locations around Scottsdale to document any attempts by the Morrison family to intimidate witnesses or suppress the story through legal threats. Meanwhile, I sat in my car outside the grocery store where Ashley was supposed to meet me, hands shaking with nervous energy as I watched for any sign our plan had been discovered. At exactly 10:30, Ashley's silver BMW pulled into the parking lot, but instead of the broken, nervous woman I'd been expecting, my daughter stepped out looking more like the confident young woman I remembered from before her marriage. Later, she would tell me that Marcus's threat to have me destroyed had finally awakened something fierce and protective in her, reminding her she wasn't just fighting for her own freedom, but for her mother's safety as well. Mom," she said as she slid into my passenger seat. "I'm ready to tell the world exactly what kind of family the Morrisons really are." The transformation in her voice, from whispered apologies to this clear declaration of war, told me my daughter was finally coming back to herself after almost 2 years of systematic psychological abuse designed to erase her individual identity. The story broke at noon on Phoenix Today's website, with the headline, "Arizona Judge's Family Accused of Systematic Abuse of Daughter-in-Law," accompanied by the audio recording of Marcus's threats and extensive documentation of the Morrison pattern of psychological and financial manipulation. Maria Santos had crafted the article perfectly, presenting Ashley's story alongside testimonies of the two previous Morrison wives who had finally agreed to speak publicly, despite their non-disclosure agreements. The pattern is clear and consistent, the article stated. The Morrison family identifies vulnerable young women, isolates them from support systems, controls their finances, and then uses legal and social pressure to silence them if they attempt to escape or expose the abuse. The reaction was immediate and explosive, with social media erupting in outrage over the abuse allegations and local news stations scrambling to follow up on the story. By 2 o'clock, Judge Morrison had been contacted by the State Judicial Ethics Committee requesting his immediate response to the allegations, and Dr. Marcus Morrison found himself facing questions from hospital administration about his fitness to continue in his leadership role. Patricia Morrison, who had built her social influence on her reputation as a charitable pillar of the community, watched helplessly as her carefully cultivated image crumbled under the weight of testimonies from women describing her systematic campaign to destroy their self-esteem and autonomy. The Morrison family's greatest strength, their reputation and social standing, had become their greatest weakness when that reputation was revealed to be built on a foundation of abuse and intimidation. Ashley's public statement, released simultaneously with the investigative article, was a masterpiece of clear-eyed truth-telling that demolished every excuse the Morrison family might offer for their behavior. For almost 2 years, I allowed myself to be convinced that I was inadequate, that I needed to be fixed, that my love for my mother and desire for independence were character flaws that made me unworthy of love. The Morrison family is skilled at psychological manipulation, at making victims believe abuse is actually guidance, that control is actually protection, that isolation is actually growth. But abuse is still abuse, even when it comes wrapped in wealth and social status, even when it's delivered with smiles and claims of caring. Ashley's statement included specific details about the financial control, social isolation, constant criticism disguised as help, and threats of psychiatric commitment that had kept her trapped in an increasingly unbearable situation. "I want other women to know that you don't have to accept treatment like this from anyone, regardless of their social standing or claims to love you. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. Real love doesn't demand you choose between your spouse and your family. Real love doesn't threaten to destroy you if you try to leave." The statement concluded with Ashley's announcement that she was filing for divorce and challenging the prenuptial agreement signed under duress, setting up what would become a very public legal battle the Morrison family could no longer control through their usual behind-the-scenes influence. The Morrison family's response to public exposure revealed just how desperate they had become to maintain control over a narrative rapidly spinning away from them. Judge Morrison issued a statement through his attorney claiming Ashley was suffering from documented mental instability, and that allegations were the result of manipulation by outside agitators using his daughter-in-law's illness to attack his family for political reasons. Patricia Morrison held a hastily organized press conference where she tearfully claimed she had only been trying to help Ashley adjust to married life, and her efforts to provide guidance had been twisted into something sinister by people who didn't understand the challenges facing young wives in prominent families. Marcus Morrison's response was perhaps most telling, as he immediately filed for emergency psychiatric evaluation of Ashley, claiming her public statements proved she was dangerous to herself and others. The fact that they're trying to have Ashley committed immediately after she speaks publicly about their abuse proves everything she said about their willingness to weaponize the psychiatric system. Elena Rodriguez told reporters outside the courthouse where Marcus's petition was being heard. "This is exactly the kind of retaliation that keeps victims silent, the threat that speaking out will be used as evidence of mental illness rather than evidence of abuse." The Morrison family's desperate attempts to discredit Ashley only served to confirm the truth of her allegations. as their behavior demonstrated exactly the kind of controlling, manipulative tactics she had described in her statement. The legal battle that followed became a proxy war for larger issues about domestic abuse, judicial corruption, and the ways wealth and social influence can be used to silence victims and avoid accountability. Sarah Chen, Ashley's attorney, had assembled a legal team including specialists in domestic abuse, financial coercion, and judicial ethics, creating a comprehensive challenge to every aspect of the Morrison power structure. This case is about more than one woman's marriage, Sarah explained to reporters. This is about whether our legal system will hold powerful families accountable for their abuse, or whether money and influence will continue to provide immunity from consequences. The prenuptial agreement challenge focused on lack of independent legal representation and financial coercion surrounding Ashley's decision to sign, while divorce proceedings revealed the extent of financial control that had made Ashley completely dependent on Marcus for even basic necessities. Most importantly, the case brought national attention to how judicial corruption could enable domestic abuse, with Judge Morrison's attempts to influence proceedings from behind the scenes becoming evidence of ethical violations that had defined his entire career. The Morrison family's strategy of using influence to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly, turning a private family matter into public examination of how the legal system fails domestic abuse victims when their abusers have sufficient power and resources. The final blow to the Morrison family's power came when the FBI announced they were opening an investigation into Judge Morrison's financial dealings and potential abuse of his judicial position to benefit his family's interests. The investigation had been triggered by revelations in Ashley's case about how custody decisions in previous Morrison divorces had been influenced by the judge's personal interests rather than the best interests of children involved. When a sitting judge uses his position to enable his family's abusive behavior and silence their victims, that's not just judicial misconduct, that's criminal conspiracy, announced FBI Special Agent Linda Torres at a press conference that marked the beginning of the end for the Morrison reign over Scottsdale's legal and social establishments. Within weeks, Judge Morrison had resigned from the bench rather than face impeachment proceedings. Dr. Marcus Morrison had been placed on administrative leave pending hospital investigation into his professional conduct, and Patricia Morrison had resigned from all charitable positions as organizations scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. The family that had seemed untouchable just months earlier was now completely discredited, their power broken by the simple act of one woman refusing to stay silent about their abuse. The Morrison Empire, built on intimidation and influence, crumbled the moment their victims found the courage to speak truth to power. The media coverage that followed Ashley's brave decision to go public created a domino effect that exposed decades of Morrison family corruption and abuse. Investigative journalists discovered that Judge Morrison's favorable custody rulings had consistently benefited families with connections to his social circle, while women without wealth or influence found themselves stripped of parental rights based on flimsy evidence and biased testimony. Dr. Marcus Morrison's rapid rise to department head was revealed to be the result of strategic donations and political pressure rather than medical excellence, with several former colleagues coming forward to describe a pattern of harassment and intimidation that had driven qualified women out of the cardiac surgery program. Patricia Morrison's charitable empire was exposed as an elaborate tax shelter designed to protect family wealth while providing minimal actual benefit to the causes she claimed to support. Most damaging of all were the testimonies from other Morrison family victims, women who had been silenced by non-disclosure agreements and threats of legal retaliation, but who found courage in Ashley's example to speak their own truths. The pattern was unmistakable. The Morrison family had been using their wealth, social influence, and legal connections to abuse women with impunity for decades, confident that their victims would never dare to challenge their power. Ashley's decision to break that silence had opened the floodgates, and the resulting tsunami of revelations destroyed the Morrison reputation completely and permanently. The courtroom where Ashley's divorce proceedings were held became a theater for justice that the Morrison family could no longer control or manipulate. Sarah Chen had assembled overwhelming evidence of financial coercion, psychological abuse, and systematic isolation that made the prenuptial agreement's validity impossible to defend. Expert witnesses testified about the long-term psychological effects of coercive control, while financial analysts revealed the sophisticated system of trusts and accounts designed to keep Ashley completely dependent on Marcus for survival. The judge assigned to the case, carefully selected for his independence from Morrison influence, ruled that the prenuptial agreement was invalid due to duress, lack of representation, and fraudulent concealment of assets. The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Morrison was not entering into this agreement freely, but was instead signing under systematic psychological pressure designed to benefit the Morrison family at her expense. The judge stated in his ruling that awarded Ashley a substantial portion of the marital assets and validated her claims of abuse. Marcus Morrison's attempts to have Ashley declared mentally incompetent backfired spectacularly when court-appointed psychiatrists confirmed that her allegations were not only credible, but showed remarkable psychological insight given the sophisticated manipulation she had endured. The public nature of the proceedings, with daily media coverage of Morrison family tactics being exposed in legal testimony, completed their transformation from Arizona royalty to pariahs whose very name had become synonymous with abuse and corruption. The aftermath of Ashley's victory rippled through Scottsdale's elite community like an earthquake, forcing a reckoning with decades of ignored abuse and protected predators. The Arizona State Bar Association launched a comprehensive investigation into Judge Morrison's judicial decisions, resulting in the overturning of numerous custody arrangements that had been influenced by corruption rather than legal merit. Scottsdale Memorial Hospital conducted a thorough review of Dr. Marcus Morrison's tenure as department head, discovering a pattern of harassment and discrimination that had created a hostile work environment for female staff and residents. The Junior League and other charitable organizations Patricia Morrison had dominated implemented new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse of their platforms by predatory families seeking social legitimacy. Most importantly, Ashley's case became a catalyst for legislative changes that strengthened protections for domestic abuse victims and closed loopholes that wealthy abusers had exploited to escape accountability. The Morrison family's downfall served as a powerful reminder that money and social status could not protect abusers indefinitely when their victims found the courage to speak truth to power. The very institutions the Morrisons had corrupted and manipulated, the courts, the hospital, the charitable organizations, ultimately became the instruments of their destruction when forced to confront the evidence of their systematic abuse and corruption. 6 months later, Ashley and I sat in a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, celebrating the finalization of her divorce and the complete invalidation of the prenuptial agreement that had been designed to keep her trapped. Ashley looked healthier than she had in years, having regained the weight she'd lost during her marriage, and recovered the confidence the Morrison family had systematically destroyed. "Mom, I keep thinking about what you said to me that day at the grocery store, about how I didn't have to choose between loving you and being married. I wish I had understood then that any family that demands that kind of choice isn't worth being part of." The financial settlement had been substantial, not just because of Ashley's legitimate claims to marital assets, but because the Morrison family was desperate to avoid further public exposure of their abusive tactics through additional legal proceedings. "The best part isn't the money, though," Ashley continued. "It's knowing that other women won't have to go through what I went through." The Morrison family's power was built on their ability to silence their victims, and once that silence was broken, they had nothing left to protect them. The investigation into Judge Morrison had revealed corruption going back decades, resulting in overturned custody decisions and financial settlements influenced by personal interests rather than legal merit. Marcus Morrison had been fired from his hospital position after an ethics investigation revealed his treatment of female colleagues mirrored his treatment of Ashley, creating a hostile work environment the hospital could no longer ignore. As we walked to our cars that afternoon, Ashley turned to me with tears in her eyes and said the words I had been waiting 2 years to hear. "Thank you for never giving up on me, Mom. Thank you for seeing who I really was even when I had forgotten." I hugged my daughter tight, remembering that night I had found her crying outside her own birthday party, remembering the fear in her voice when she called from gas station bathrooms, remembering the moment I decided no family was powerful enough to separate me from my child. "Ashley, baby, you never have to thank me for loving you. That's what mothers do. We fight for our children, no matter how powerful the enemy or how impossible the odds." The war for Ashley's soul was over, and we had won not through money or influence or legal manipulation, but through the simple power of truth and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. The Morrison family had made one fatal mistake when they decided to target Ashley. They had underestimated the fury of a mother whose child had been threatened, and that underestimation had cost them everything they thought made them untouchable. In the end, their own words, delivered in threats and ultimatums designed to intimidate us into silence, had become the weapons that destroyed them, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to abuse is simply refusing to be quiet about it anymore. The final chapter of the Morrison family saga came when I received a letter from Elena Rodriguez, informing me that the FBI investigation had resulted in federal charges against Judge Morrison for corruption and abuse of judicial power. Marcus Morrison had been barred from practicing medicine in Arizona and faced malpractice suits from dozens of former patients whose cases had been mishandled due to his incompetence and arrogance. Patricia Morrison had been forced to sell her Paradise Valley mansion to pay legal fees and tax penalties related to her fraudulent charitable activities. The family that had once seemed untouchable was now completely destroyed, their wealth dissipated, their reputation in ruins, their influence gone forever. "Justice isn't always swift," Elena wrote, "but it is inevitable when people like Ashley find the courage to speak truth to power." As I folded the letter and looked out at the Arizona sunset, I thought about all the other mothers and daughters who might be saved because Ashley had refused to be silenced. The Morrison family had taught me that evil often hides behind wealth and respectability, but they had also taught me that a mother's love is more powerful than any amount of money or influence when it comes to protecting her child. In the end, they had given me the greatest gift possible. They had shown me that I was stronger than I ever knew, and that no enemy is too powerful when you're fighting for someone you love.